for coming. Let me switch this on. I'm a little bit alarmed by the quality of the discussants here. Roger's book came out when I was an undergraduate, and I wrote essays about foreign aid reconsidered, and I feel a bit as if I'm reading out an essay to a rather grand. And when I first joined DFID, I had just come from number 10 Downing Street, and I arrived in that slightly cocky way that people do when they come out of number 10 Downing Street, thinking that all that was needed was some intelligent pressure, and we could solve all the problems. And after a few weeks, Eamon was deputised to come and show me some ropes and explain to me what we knew and what we didn't know in development. And he did so with a combination of tact and aggression that I shall, that I hope he won't be employing later today. So, with some trepidation, I look forward to your reactions. And the motivation for this is a series of questions that I don't know the answer to and didn't know the answer to. And this is one of them. Why is aid reform so slow? We all, I think many of us in this room think that aid works, but that it could work a lot better. And the question is, given that we know all these things that need to be done, we need to reduce proliferation, we need to reform the way we give technical assistance, we need to untie aid. Why is it so difficult to get these things implemented? Another question that I was asked by a minister was, where does this Paris and Accra agenda take us? When we've arrived, are we going to give all our aid to one organisation, the World Bank, or are we going to just send a cheque to Tanzania? How's it going to work? And our inability to describe the destination of the aid reform agenda seemed to him a real problem, because he was unable to lead and explain the vision of where we were trying to get with our reforms when we couldn't describe the destination very well. A third question that, just trying to make sure I'm not in the way here, third question that I found when I was working in government that we wanted to answer is, what exactly should international organisations do? Should the World Bank be working on climate change, or should that be somebody else? Should the IMF have a role in developing countries? Should the UN continue to lead on capacity building? And if so, what does that mean? A whole set of questions about what do we think the international architecture should look like, we didn't really know the answer to. And a last question that I found that we kept being asked and we couldn't really answer is, why is it that we can't convince people that aid works? Why, as an industry, as a set of organisations, have we not really got a convincing answer to that? And so this paper, any of these questions would be the subject of an entire book, a research programme. I'm not going to answer those questions, but this paper came out of my trying to think about why we don't know the answers to these questions. And what I realised is that there's a set of underlying issues that actually go to the heart of all these questions. And so that's what I want to share with you today. So here's a question. If we didn't have any aid agencies, would we invent them? And this is a picture of David Livingstone, many of you will know, a missionary. And actually, David Livingstone was born in Blantyre, probably most of you know that, just 5 miles from East Kilbride. So we've been a tradition of sending missionaries from East Kilbride back to the middle of the 19th century. Why did we send missionaries? Well, imagine asking yourself the question, why don't we just send money from rich countries to poor countries, to people in poor countries? Why do we need people to do that for us? Why do we give money to an organisation and they spend the money? And the reason why we started sending missionaries is you can't do that. There is no way you can identify the people you want to help. There's no way you can ensure that what you want to send them arrives. If you want to send a goat to somebody, and how do you know that that goat has got to the person you're trying to help? There are returns to scale in managing these kinds of programs, and you also want to know after the event that something has got there. Now, I know most of us don't want aid agencies to be like missionaries, but actually the problem that missionaries were trying to solve is rather like the problem that aid agencies are trying to solve. We're giving aid agencies that responsibility to do these things on our behalf. The other problem that missionaries were solving, and which aid agencies are also trying to solve, is that they are aligning the preferences of the people who are giving the money with the people who are receiving it. The missionaries wanted to know, the people giving money to the missionaries wanted to know that the people they were helping shared their values, that this would be money that would be used in a way that they approved of for the objectives that they wanted to achieve. And the missionaries were there really to arbitrate between the intentions of the giver and the experience of the receiver. So what aid agencies are doing for us is solving a similar set of issues. And there's a long section in the paper, which I think is outside if people haven't got it, it looks like that, about the political economy of aid. And I'm going to skip over that and jump straight to the conclusions of that section. And the conclusion of that section is that we have a series of deep characteristics of the aid industry, 4 of them, that actually explain a lot of the challenges that we face. The first is this imperfect asymmetric information problem, that it's very difficult if you're sitting in a rich country to know whether the money you give is being received in a poor country, whether it's addressing the problem that needs to be addressed, whether it meets the needs of the people you're trying to help. And this problem of the broken feedback loop is especially difficult in the aid business compared to other kinds of business. We know very little about what the beneficiaries, the people who are intended to benefit from what we do, whether they really are getting the benefits that we intend. The second problem is diverse objectives. We often talk as if we have a single shared objective of reducing poverty or the Millennium Development Goals, but actually within that is a whole series of different choices that are being made about what the priorities are, different parts of the Millennium Development Goals, different ways of achieving them, which people in which countries, over what time, and in what ways we want to help achieve the Millennium Development Goals. But more importantly, actually, donors also have additional objectives. As well as reducing poverty, they want to pursue perfectly legitimate foreign policy objectives, the security of the country, commercial, strategic interests. And they are, on the one hand, wanting to pursue poverty reduction, but they also want to achieve, at the same time, some of these broader objectives. And some of these are in direct conflict. One country that wants to increase its relationship with the country may actually be, that may come at the expense of some other donor's relationship. The third type of problem we have is what economists call a principal agent problem. The principal agent problem is that the people paying for something are not the same as the people who are implementing it, and their interests are not the same. The people who are actually, we saw this with David Livingstone actually over time, he began to have different opinions than the people who were paying for his mission. And we see it today with aid agencies, that the organizations and the individuals themselves have interests. And then the last challenge is a collective action problem. We have to find some way of taking decisions together collectively. And what the paper argues is, this is a gratuitous picture of Dambisa Moyo, but the reason will be clear in a second. What the paper argues is that the problems that we know about in the aid industry are linked in one way or another to those political economy challenges. So let me give you one example, which is proliferation. All of us know that there are too many aid agencies working in too many countries. I'm told that there are now more UN bodies working on development than there are developing countries. Okay, so why have we got this proliferation problem? Well, if you look at the political economy challenges we're facing, well, we have diverse objectives, and so all of us, although we want to reduce poverty, we also want to have a footprint in the country concerned so that we can have political representation and we can build commercial connections. So the diverse objectives mean that we tend to proliferate. Principal agent problems, if you ask people who run aid agencies, would you like to stop working in this country, and you're the person responsible for infrastructure in that country, you can make a very compelling case for why you should continue to be there. And so it proves very difficult to reduce proliferation because the people who are the experts in this also have an interest in it. The proliferation problem is is a collective action problem. How do we agree who's going to do what where when there's nobody in charge? And what the paper claims or argues is that all the problems that we have in the aid industry, one way or another, can be mapped back to the underlying political economy of aid, that there is that the reasons we act the way we do can all be explained by the aid industry. I should explain the gratuitous picture of Denby Simoeo. People like Denby Simoeo in her book Dead Aid is making the case that aid doesn't work and that we should look for alternative ways of helping developing countries. And I think the challenge for all of us is to say, well, actually, these are challenges that we recognize, but that we can do something about them. And the question is, can we actually do something about them? And what I argue in the paper is that our problem at the moment is that we try and address these things on the right-hand side. We say that we're going to tackle proliferation, but we do that simply by making a policy announcement that from now on we believe that there should be less proliferation in the aid industry. But unless we tackle these things on the left-hand side, we're not actually going to be able to move away from the equilibrium we're in. So we need to think of shifting the equilibrium rather than moving away from it. Well, the good news is that that list of problems is actually a list of problems that we see in lots of other walks of life. Multiple actors, diverse objectives, coordination problems, principal agent problems. You know, these are almost every social endeavour is characterised by those problems. And we tend to look in three different ways at how we might solve those problems. One is planning, that we get together and coordinate amongst ourselves. One is markets, that we set up some kind of competitive framework and price mechanism. And an increasing third way of doing things is networks. And think of Wikipedia or the creation of open source software or TripAdvisor or book recommendations in Amazon as the network part of this. Not markets, not centrally planned, but some loose collaboration of people sharing information with each other. I'm going to skip over this. This is actually donors in Ethiopia were asked where they think they have a comparative advantage. And it turns out that 15 donors think they have a comparative advantage in agriculture. What this tells you is that they don't understand what comparative advantage means. And many of the donors think they have comparative advantage in 6 or 7 sectors. That's really a segue into planning. The paper argues that we use planning as a framework for solving our problems. That we need to coordinate amongst ourselves. So what do? We get together around the table. Here is a picture of people doing exactly that. And we try to figure out who's going to do what. And that seems like quite a good solution to a collective action problem. But there are some deep problems with it. One is that there is nobody in charge, that these are sovereign governments who can't actually enforce agreements on each other, that the information they need to be good planners isn't available to them, that the number of actors in these committees is growing and growing and growing as the number of organisations proliferate, and that there's no evolution built into that system, that it's a rather static model. And the paper perhaps caricatures it a bit, but in some ways this is a very Gosplan-like system. We have a 5-year plan, we invite the government to have a 5-year plan, and we help them write it if they don't want to write it themselves. And either we pick the bits that we want to do, or we hope that they will tell us which bits that they want each of us to do. And then we all go away and do it. And that mechanism, I argue, isn't going to solve the problems for the reasons we have here, that there's nobody in charge and we don't have the right information. Another version of solving these problems is markets. And markets are quite a good way. I mean, there are people who think that markets are the solution to everything and what we need is free markets. I'm not one of those people. If I was one of those people, the experience of the financial crisis would have put me off. But markets are quite a good way of exposing the costs and benefits of different choices, of enabling decentralized people to make decisions and still contribute to a collective good. You're all familiar with the Adam Smith quote about the baker making the bread not because he's been told to, but out of self-interest, because the market creates an incentive for him to do that. And markets are also good at ensuring that things that don't work stop getting funded, and things that do work attract more resources. There is a problem about markets in the aid business, which is that there is no price signal. And that's rather a big problem for a market, right? You can't run a market with no price. And the second problem is that the people who are supposed to benefit from all of these activities are not the consumer, right? We have intended beneficiaries in developing countries, but the decision makers are, you the taxpayer in the north, are the people who have political control over what is being done with your money. And that lack of a connection between the beneficiary and the consumer is very unusual, and in other that means that this market isn't going to work without some assistance. And then the last problem, as you all know, is spillover effect. 5 minutes. Okay, good. I think we're okay. So externalities, the problem with externalities is that if one person's decision affects another person, the market won't take care of that unless you have some intervention to make sure that you subsidize positive spillovers and tax negative ones. Networks, I'm going to move quickly through. It's discussed in the paper. The critical thing here is that people do many things for non-monetary reasons. They collaborate and work together to achieve things together. This is happening. This has always happened in different ways. This isn't just an internet phenomenon. And a lot of people think that the aid industry has a lot to learn from these models of social cooperation. Manoush Shafiq has a paper about it. The two big problems with it are that these things only work well when those people basically have the same objective. They don't work very well when people have diametrically different objectives. And the other thing is they don't work very well when... I'll move on. So, the proposition in the paper is that we need to look for a combination of things from regulation, from markets, and from networks, which together will address the political economy problems that I talked about earlier. For example, you could use markets to try to generate price information. You could use markets to do things like online procurement. You could create challenge funds and so on. But you need to do that in an environment that is very information rich, so that you can do things like track what the impact is on the beneficiaries and create incentives for the people who are making the decisions to take more account of the interests of the beneficiaries. The details of these ideas are in the paper, but the point that I want to make is not that we should definitely have an aid ombudsman as a form of regulation. That's to exemplify the idea that some combination of market interventions, network interventions, and regulations could together address the political economy of aid challenges. And this is my attempt to explain that if our problem is imperfect information and absence of feedback, then we should be looking for things like radical transparency. We should be trying to make contracts more explicit so that we have information about what the outputs and outcomes are, as well as the inputs, that we should be trying to get feedback from beneficiaries. That the problems of, take another example, principal agent problems, again, you want to look for explicit contracts. That's the new institutional economic literature is about the idea that you create contracts to try and incentivize the people who are working for you to do the things that you want them to do. That you have more information about what they're doing and what impact they're having. And so the challenge that I'm trying to lay out is that what is the set of things like this that we could do that would help us address those problems that are in turn the drivers of the problems that we have in the aid industry. Now, that's a lot of different kinds of ideas and information, but the central point that I want to focus on is that we have the problems we have for a reason, that there is an equilibrium that's been established between the donors and the recipients of aid, and that a lot of our reform agenda argues that we should move away from it. That we should simply, that we wish it wasn't so, we don't want to have proliferation, so let's not have proliferation. What the paper argues is that actually we have to understand why that equilibrium is as it is, and think of ways of changing it, of shifting the incentives for having the equilibrium where it is, try to move it somewhere else. I don't think planning is going to be the solution to this. I don't think having longer committee meetings. Many people, Eamon's been working recently in Nigeria. Long coordination meetings among donors are becoming increasingly difficult ways of trying to resolve these problems because there is, in the end, no way that people can agree to things that are not in the interest of their organisation and of their political masters. So I'm suggesting instead that we should look for a combination of markets and networks within a regulated system to try and shift that equilibrium. And the aim is not to design a new global architecture for aid, but rather to create incentives within the system so that it evolves over time in the right direction, to create the variation and selection that means that institutions that are ineffective or behaviours that are ineffective become less attractive and behaviours that are effective become more attractive. I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.